Good afternoon and welcome to this special edition of IBA News, reviewing the top stories of the week. Joining me in this studio throughout the broadcast is Ambassador Yoram Ettinger, an expert on Israel-U.S. relations and a Middle East analyst. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
We begin with the upsurge in violence, which is continuing on an almost daily basis. The ongoing terror wave this week took the life of 20-year-old Benjamin Yakubovich, a border police officer who was critically injured on the 4th of November when a Palestinian assailant rammed his vehicle into him at the Halchul junction near Hebron. Yakubovich succumbed to his injuries on Sunday, making him the 12th Israeli fatality in nearly 2 months of violence. The officer's family announced that they would donate his organs. Throughout the week, over a dozen Israelis were injured in a series of attacks across the West Bank and Jerusalem, as we see in this review from IBA's Efrat Batat.
The past week started off with a series of attacks which followed one another inside the West Bank. Sunday morning, 4 Israelis were wounded, 2 of them seriously, when a Palestinian man rammed his car into a group of young men who were waiting for a bus at the Tapuach junction. The driver was shot and killed by border police guards deployed in the area. Shortly after on Sunday, a Palestinian woman stabbed a guard at the entrance to the settlement of Beitar Elit. Security video from the scene shows the woman speaking to the guard before sneaking her hand into her bag, pulling out a knife and lunging at him. The victim managed to shoot and injure the female assailant. Hours later, Sunday afternoon, an Israeli man was moderately injured in a stabbing attack near the West Bank settlement of Alfei Menashe. The victim drove himself to a nearby IDF checkpoint, where he received treatment and was evacuated to hospital. On Tuesday, attacks shifted to Jerusalem, where 2 separate stabbings took place within minutes of each other. First, 2 Palestinian minors, aged 12 and 14, stabbed a security guard on a light rail car in the city's northeastern neighborhood of Pisgat Ze'ev. The 25-year-old guard quickly fired back, injuring the younger attacker, while the second one, who was tackled down by other passengers, was taken into police custody. In a separate incident just minutes after, a 37-year-old Palestinian wielding a knife attempted to stab 2 police guards standing outside the Damascus gate in the Old City. The patrol unit was not harmed and the attacker was shot and disarmed. Later on that same day, a Palestinian man attempted to stab a group of border police officers manning a checkpoint near the East Jerusalem village of Abu Dis. The officers had requested the man to identify himself when he pulled out a knife and attacked the guards. He was quickly shot and disarmed and later succumbed to his wounds. In other developments, the 13-year-old Palestinian boy who last month stabbed an Israeli teen of his same age in Pisgat Ze'ev has confessed to the attack. Ahmed Mansara, whom along with his elder cousin attacked the boy after stabbing another Jewish man, was brought to court on Tuesday. His lawyers hope to reduce the charges against him in an attempt to avoid a prison term. The Mansara incident generated much attention last month in the international media after PA Chairman Mahmoud Abbas raised incitement and repeatedly charged that the assailant was killed in cold blood by Jewish settlers. It was only days later when Israel released footage showing the 13-year-old attacker being treated by Israeli doctors at the Hadassah Medical Center. In the wake of recent attacks carried out by young assailants, lawmakers this week worked to advance bills that would allow for children perpetrators under the age of 14 to receive a prison sentence. Currently, minors under 14 cannot be sent to jail. However, according to the new law proposals, the minimum age would be waived, particularly in cases of minors who commit crimes with a nationalist motive. And in the latest development today, Israeli undercover forces raided a hospital in Hebron early this morning. Forces shot and killed 1 Palestinian during an operation to detain another man suspected of carrying out a stabbing attack 2 weeks ago. The Shin Bet security agency said in a statement that the man killed was shot after attacking soldiers as they tried to arrest his cousin.
Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is now making his way back home following a highly anticipated visit to Washington, where he met with U.S. President Barack Obama and leading Democrats. In an attempt to put the increasingly bitter disagreements behind them, the two sat down for their first meeting in over a year of tense relations. The talks were described by both as productive, stressing the unbreakable bond and strong alliance between their two countries.
In light of what
the States is giving indispensable help to Israel, indispensable, but Israel is returning that assistance almost on a daily basis in intelligence and in many other things. I think that what is important is not merely President Obama's commitment to bolstering Israel's security for the next 10 years, but also his commitment to maintain Israel's qualitative military edge so that Israel can defend itself by itself against any threat. That is the most important commitment. And despite our disagreement over the nuclear deal with Iran, I believe that America and Israel can and should work together now to ensure Iran complies with the deal, to curb Iran's regional aggression, and to fight Iranian terrorism around the world.
Ambassador Ettinger, you served as a liaison with the Congress. How would you sum up this trip? Was it productive?
Well, to be productive, it had to prove that U.S.-Israel relations transcend the Palestinian issue. And indeed, the atmosphere has proven that in spite of the irreconcilable personalities and worldviews of Netanyahu and Obama, there is a rift which cannot be bridged. But still, it was productive because both acted in a mature manner, namely subordinating the less important issues such as Palestinian issues, such as Jewish housing in Judea, Samaria, and Jerusalem, to the real important issues for America, namely Islamic terrorism assault on America, the anti-American Arab tsunami, the tectonic events which are now haunting Syria and Iraq, and in fact the whole of the Middle East, and the clear and present danger to all pro-American Arab regimes. When it comes to each one of those prime American interests, Israel has played a major role in combating Islamic terrorism, in fending off the assault of anti-American Arab tsunami, and in collaborating with the pro-American Arab regimes in fighting subversion and terrorism which haunts them.
Well, one of the things that they discussed was expediting the talks in the 10-year U.S. military aid package to Israel. Is this still going to be sort of a parting gift for the Obama administration, you think?
Well, I think that military aid is a misnomer. Israel does not get foreign aid from the U.S. The U.S. invests in Israel, and the investment produces a return which is the highest on any American investment anywhere in the world. If there would be Israel, for instance, in the Persian Gulf, the U.S. would be able to contract, to reduce dramatically its presence in the Persian Gulf. Because there is an Israel in the eastern flank of the Mediterranean, the U.S. can avoid sending more American aircraft carriers with tens of thousands of American soldiers to the Mediterranean, and that saves the American taxpayers some $10–15 billion every single year. In addition to our commercial role as the most important channel of cutting-edge technologies from American research and development centers in Israel, which come back to the Silicon Valley, enhance American competitiveness, providing American jobs, and increase American exports.
Well, let's move to the Palestinian issue right now, but we're going to go back to Washington, where the Prime Minister was also speaking at a Center for American Progress think tank, and he reiterated that he is ready to negotiate with the Palestinians. However, Netanyahu admitted that he currently sees no solution to the volatile conflict surrounding the Temple Mount.
I think on the question of territories and borders, this is about 95% of what Israel has to cede. On the question of mutual recognition, that is recognition of a Jewish state, nation state of the Jewish people, and the security arrangements and so on, that's what we need on the other side. There's the question of the Jerusalem and specifically the Temple Mount. I think it's insoluble. I mean, I just don't see right now a solution for that, and I think it has to remain under Israeli sovereignty, and that's the only way to prevent this from exploding.
So we see he says he's in favor of a two-state solution, and he's putting the blame on the Palestinians. So where do we go from here?
Well, we have to put the Palestinian issue in the proper context. The proper context is there have been many more Arabs murdered by Palestinian terrorism than Jews. The fact that the Arab world is turning its back on the Palestinians, is not interested in the current wave of terrorism and violence, has risen. And the reason is that Palestinians, Mahmoud Abbas in person, they were involved in terrorism, subversion in Egypt in the 1950s, had to flee Egypt. They were involved in terrorism in Syria in the 1960s. They had to flee Syria. They had to flee Jordan in 1970 because they triggered a civil war in Jordan. And they caused series of civil wars and much bloodshed in Lebanon. They collaborated with Saddam Hussein's invasion of Kuwait. Palestinians had to flee Syria now because they served as one of the ruthless arms of Assad. Palestinians fled Iraq because they served as one of the ruthless arms of Saddam Hussein. There is a reason why Arabs do not send much money but much rhetoric to the Palestinians, and that puts in context the probability of peace. But more than that, for one to assume that there is a good chance of having peace between Israel and the Palestinians, one has to ask oneself, how come for the last 1400 years there hasn't been intra-Arab peaceful coexistence? Are we to believe that the Arabs will shower upon the so-called infidel Jew that which they have refrained from sharing with one another, peaceful coexistence?
Well, keeping that in mind, Ambassador, do you think that the Obama administration perhaps has come to the understanding that they're not going to be able to reach any sort of peace process between Israel and the Palestinians, and maybe they just want to say, this is the situation now?
Well, hopefully the meeting with Netanyahu proves that the Obama administration is finally coming at grip with the reality of the Middle East. In fact, Obama would not allow the short-term conflict with Israel over Iran to do away with the long-term synergy between the US and Israel. And that proves a certain level of maturity on the part of the White House.
Well, another controversy brewing is Netanyahu's recent appointment of Ron Baratz as the head of the Prime Minister's Department of Media and Hasbara. The selection took many by surprise, considering that Baratz has a record of expressing his personal political, or shall we say politically incorrect views in a range of outlets and social media. A former philosophy professor and a founder and head of a conservative Hebrew website, Baratz has in the past bashed President Reuven Rivlin, deemed U.S. President Barack Obama a modern anti-Semite, and compared Secretary of State John Kerry's mental age to that of a 12-year-old. Baratz also didn't spare Netanyahu himself of his own criticism. The appointment of Baratz has raised eyebrows among those who question the Prime Minister's discretion, or lack of that for that matter, and the fact that such an outspoken personality with such explicit views was chosen to serve as the top media advisor and head of public diplomacy and media. While the Obama administration tried to downplay diplomatic fallout related to the Baratz comments, the U.S. Vice President didn't take them sitting down. Joe Biden had some extremely harsh words for the appointment of the government media head. Although he didn't mention Baratz by name, Biden expressed his outrage on the matter.
There is no excuse. There should be no tolerance for any member or employee of an Israeli administration referring to the President of the United States in derogatory terms. Period. 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 There is no justification. We're a fresh Israeli voice degrading the Secretary of State who's worked so hard for so long for the security of Israel.
Is this a case of pure negligence or deliberate action?
Well, this is a domestic issue. It's an issue which has to do with the Prime Minister's office. It seems to me that one has to underestimate the intelligence of the American administration in a great manner to assume that this is something which preoccupies their mind. The fact that Vice President Biden spoke about it is probably another affirmation of the assumption that the role of vice president is not always a top role in American politics, and very few vice presidents in American history did rise to the level of presidency. But for instance, if the vice president is so concerned about Ron Baratz, how come he's not concerned about the U.S. ambassador to the UN, Samantha Powers, who, while being a professor at Harvard, before becoming Obama's chief international policy advisor when he first ran for president, Samantha Powers was known to have told her audience at Harvard, if the Israelis do not get it diplomatically, we may have to use our military forces to stick some wisdom into their brain. How come he's not concerned about the national security advisor of Obama, who was known before she became Obama's top official to refer to Israel as that Zionist entity in a derogatory intention? Now, I do not justify their attitude, I do not justify Ran Barat's, but to transform that into anything but a minute element in the order of priorities of Israel or US, in my mind, is an expression of complete miscomprehension of what the relations are all about.
You say it's an internal matter from Israel, but maybe the decision by Netanyahu not to immediately get rid of Barat shows that he doesn't want to rectify the ties with the United States, with Washington.
Well, as I said, the issue is a tumbleweed on the road compared to the sandstorms, which are now haunting especially the US, but also Israel. To assume that the identity of Ran Baratz should subordinate the calculation of counter-terrorism in the Middle East and beyond should be more important in setting the US-Israel agenda, in developing the next generation of combat planes, the next generation of missiles, in my mind, is an act, again, which underestimates America's order of priorities.
So you want to put it into perspective. We're going to move on to the next item. In other news, Israeli officials from across the political spectrum are vehemently denouncing the European Union's approval of new guidelines for labeling of products manufactured in Israeli settlements in the West Bank. According to the new guidelines, EU member states can place consumer labels on Israeli exports produced beyond the pre-1967 lines in East Jerusalem, the West Bank, and the Golan Heights. Let's hear some of the reactions.
Israel rejects the EU decision. We think that this decision is of a discriminatory nature and it smacks of boycott. Under the guise of a bureaucratic decision, what we see here is a political attempt to change the reality on the ground. We wish that the European Union would have invested its energy and its efforts in bringing the Palestinians back to the negotiating table rather than labeling Israeli products. It starts with Israeli products from the settlements and nobody knows where it will end. And we believe that it is a wrong decision and it is a very bad step. It is not helpful also when it comes to the relations between Israel and the EU.
The decision of the European Union to identify the source of production for Israeli products and identify them from settlement products is a very important step and very good step. It confirms the illegality of Israeli settlements. It confirms that Israeli production inside the occupied territories is illegal. And it gives the European person the possibility of boycotting settlement products.
This is not a boycott. I repeat again, this is not a boycott. Because how can it be a boycott if the products are allowed to come onto the market as they have done previously also? And there's another important point here. The European Union is against sanctions, against boycotting, against isolation of Israel. And therefore, the measures that we have taken and which again are all based on existing legislation have absolutely nothing to do with that.
Ambassador, many people have dismissed the BDS movement as the fringe. It doesn't really have much impact on Israel's economy. And now we have the EU taking a step like this. How significant is that?
Well, economically, it's very much insignificant. However, what it does, it exposes or unmasks the European position. The issue is not economic boycott. The issue is not political boycott. The issue is, do the Europeans want negotiation process or do they want to prejudge the outcome? Through their action, they've prejudged the outcome. They want to determine, not Israel, they want to determine where Israel boundaries would be. If they would be fair, they should have boycotted, so to speak, Israeli and Arab product coming out of that area which is undecided yet. It's an undecided area.
So they're singling out Israel here.
Pardon me?
They're singling out Israel here.
Well, they're singling because they want to prejudge the outcome. The same thing applies to housing. For them to call for a halt of Jewish construction in East Jerusalem, in Judea and Samaria and the Golan means prejudging the outcome. If they would not prejudge, they would call for a halt to all construction in Judea, Samaria, Golan Heights in Jerusalem. Then at least they would be balanced, but they are not balanced, and therefore they should not be trusted, and that unfortunately is reflected through what I would call the suicidal trend in Europe. They have lost their posture of deterrence, they have lost their power, their projection of power, and they have demonstrated it by kowtowing to the Arabs and trying to pressure Israel, which has many more important markets.
Thank you, Ambassador Ettinger. Please stay with us to the end of the show. Well, now, amid growing calls for boycotting and divesting from Israel, the governor of Mississippi, Phil Bryant, this week led a large trade delegation to Israel, seeking out partnership and deals with Israeli firms. Governor Bryant was very passionate about visiting the Holy Land, and here's what he had to say about attempts to boycott the country.
One of the reasons that we brought our largest business contingent to any nation, to any trade mission here in Israel, is to let people know that Mississippi, along with the vast majority of the United States population and businesses, support Israel. We stand with Israel. We believe that so goes Israel, so goes the United States of America. So we are standing together firmly with our partners and friends in Israel.
Governor, what areas are you looking to do partnership with Israel? Is it defense? Is it cybersecurity? Is it agriculture?
All those things. Absolutely. Our UAV, UASs, as we talked about earlier, is one of the programs. We're here talking to the medical community with hopefully a partnership with our University Medical Center, looking at any number of challenges that both countries have. There's a lot of commonality between Mississippi and Israel, and of course the defense industry. The senior senator of Mississippi, Thad Cochran, will be looking at appropriations for funding in military defense for Israel, and so we hope to be effective there as well in a geopolitical way.
Governor, why is a state that has fewer Jews in it than, let's say, an apartment building in Tel Aviv so passionate about Israel?
Well, we've got about 1,600 Jews and Israeli businessmen and women throughout Mississippi, so there is a contingency, but all of us have a cultural relationship with Israel. All of us, from the very early times of our church learnings, understand how important it is for us to be a part of the Jewish culture, part of the belief in our Old Testament, which Christianity started from. So it is part of, from our faith, our religion, our culture, that we are drawn to Israel.
Finally, Governor, when you go back to Jackson, what's your message going to be?
Well, that Israel is a beautiful country. We don't want anyone to be afraid to visit here. In 1 week's time, you can have over 300 shootings in Chicago. So we understand that the environment can be threatening, but it's also threatening in the United States in major cities. So we want Americans to come and enjoy, come and see the Holy City, be a part of this, and to let them know we are strong and standing with Israel in both economic, defense, and cultural matters.
Earlier this week, the Israel Democracy Institute presented its annual Democracy Index to President Reuven Rivlin at his residence. The document had some worrying findings. One of the core elements of democracies is the sense citizens have of being able to influence the government. Yochanan Plessner, the president of IBA, said the lack of trust in political institutions is growing. Also this week, the nation said goodbye to Yitzhak Navon, the fifth president of Israel, who passed away at the age of 94. Navon was buried in an official ceremony on Sunday among the great state leaders on Jerusalem's Mount Herzl. Navon, who served from 1978 until 1983, was born in Jerusalem to a prominent Sephardi family and was a linguist who spoke Ladino and Arabic, which he used to foster ties with Egyptian President Anwar Sadat in the days of peace with Egypt. After his term as president, he returned to political life and served as education minister and minister of culture, where he worked to bridge ethnic and social gaps. He was also a playwright, and his acclaimed Bustan Sfaradi is still performed on stages worldwide. Thousands attended his funeral, and the nation's leaders eulogized him. He was buried alongside his first wife, Ophira, who lost her battle to cancer in 1993.
האבא הפרטי שלי.
מספידים, בני משפחתו, ראש הממשלה נתניהו, הנשיא ריבלין והנשיא לשעבר פרס, תיארו את דמותו החמה, רבת התחומים.
גם כשהוא היה נשיא. וגם כשהוא היה שר חינוך. ואתם יכולים לדמיין את הרגע הזה שיושב לו שר חינוך.
חזון ייפרע עם. אמרת לא פעם כי יש להציב חזון ברור לעם, גם אם הוא עלול להיתפס בעת הצבתו כלא פופולרי.
Israelis increasingly believe that they can affect the government less and less. They believe that the government decision-making in the political system is done in a way that is detached from the day-to-day realities of everyday Israelis.
So that's worrying, isn't it?
Of course, it's worrying. A growing sense of alienation, which is what we're seeing, is always a worry in a democracy, especially in such a challenged democracy like ours.
So you're measuring things like tolerance, equality, and discrimination. These are values and signs of democracy?
Yeah, those are some of the basic values that each democracy needs to uphold, strengthen, and what we're seeing that in some of the indicators, for example, equality, there are signs that Israelis believe less and less in the equal right of participation in national level decision-making by Israeli Arab citizens.
The Israeli Arab citizens have a big part in this index, and it seems that they see themselves, even you said, as Palestinians, but also as Israeli citizens. Is this a sign that there's a collapse in democracy among them?
No. Israeli Arabs, what we used to label as Israeli Arabs, increasingly self-label themselves as Palestinians with an Israeli citizenship. It's uncomfortable for, I would say, for many Jewish Israeli ears to hear, including to myself. But this is a reality that we have to get used to, and we have to understand that in today's world, people have multiple identities. And that's okay. One identity doesn't necessarily come on account or instead of the other.
That was Yochanan Plessner of the IDI. Mother Nature also had her say here at home this week. Residents of the southern coastal city of Ashkelon were flooded by heavy rain showers on Monday as a brief but intense winter storm swept the area. The downpour